Hi, this is Morgan, and today I will be walking you through how to read a cross-stitch pattern. The pattern that you see right now is our Kawaii Letter Says Hi pattern for September. And from the cross-stitch pattern, you can see that it's laid out on a grid. So each square on the grid actually represents a single cross stitch, and a cross stitch is made out of two separate stitches that form the shape of an X, and that's why cross stitch is also referred to as X stitch. And so each of these squares that's filled in is a stitch on your final cross stitch. So with each cross stitch pattern, you will have a grid that has numbers associated with it, and those numbers are the DMC embroidery floss numbers associated with the colors on the pattern. And so with this cross stitch kit, if you picked it up from the library, you'll have all the supplies you need in the right colors. But say where you were to buy your own pattern, you would want to look at the legend on the pattern and see what colors of floss you need. And so with this pattern, we have two separate teals, an orange, a yellow, black, and white. And there's only two white stitches in the entire pattern, and those are the eyes. The rest of the stitches around here, those are just blank. They're not actually stitches. So you only need to worry about those two white stitches. And if I were starting this pattern, what I typically do is I start with a single color. And so I would start with the dark teal color and get the base of the envelope done. And that will make the rest of the pattern go a little bit quicker. And when you're starting a cross stitch, like I said, it is in the shape of an X. And so that X fills up one of these squares on the grid. And so if we were doing a cross stitch, we would start in the bottom corner of one of the squares, and we'd go up to the top. And then when we threaded back through to the front of the fabric, we would go from the bottom to the other top to make that X shape. And the cool thing about that is that when you're doing these like long strands of the same color, you don't have to do each individual X stitch on its own. You could do a whole line of stitches of the same color. And to do that, you would go from the bottom to the top. And then when you threaded back through, you'd go to the bottom to the top of the next square, bottom to the top of the next square. And then when you were done with the little string of that same color, you would come back and do that top stitch. And so that's just the basics of looking at a grid and understanding the pattern. When you are getting started, you do want to get an idea of how big the pattern is. And one of the easiest ways to do that is there are dark lines and lighter lines all the way down the pattern. If you take two dark lines, in between those is a total of 10 squares. And if you take a dark line and then one of the lighter lines in between there is a total of 5 squares. And so that kind of just helps you count. So, looking at the bottom row of the pattern, I know that I have, the 3 completed chunks of 5, and then I would add on 4 and add on 3, and that would give me the count of, the entire cross stitch or width of the envelope. And then a couple other things about this pattern is what's happening is, an envelope's being open and it's kind of like confetti and happiness exploding out of it. So up here you see all these individual little spots filled. You could follow the pattern to a T, or you could just kind of make up your own interpretation of how the confetti is going. I don't think any pattern or any actual cross stitch I've done based on this pattern, the little confetti has been in the same spot. So you can take some creative license with that. And then with the text, so the text is not a cross stitch. You are just doing a straight line stitch. Some folks refer to it as a back stitch. And the way to think of it is that instead of, making the, pixelated vibe of a cross stitch, you are just stitching, straight lines. And so when it shows, this part of the H and it goes from here to here, you would just stitch here to here. You wouldn't come back and try to do a cross stitch. It's just imagine it as, a more of a straight line and not like a block that you're trying to fill up. So those are just some things with getting started with this pattern. It's a lot of fun and it is very cute. And I look forward to seeing your work on this cross stitch.